There we go. All right. Took a little while, but we got there. So with the recording started, welcome everyone to this webinar hosted by Revved Up. I'll be moderating today. I'll also be a bit of an active panelist as well, so I'm playing a dual role. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Revved Up, and today's panel and webinar is on how to succeed with Outbound in 2025. It is a hot topic. We've had so much interest in it. There's a lot to run through. What I would say up front is that we've had a lot of submitted questions as well. If we don't get through all of them, which is a very high probability we won't get through everything, Mark and Lucy have very kindly agreed that we'll run a separate recorded session after this where we do answer every single question. So if it's not answered today and you had a really burning question, don't worry. We are going to give you an answer and we'll send it on to you at some point next week. So hopefully everyone's in the right spot. You are here to learn about how to succeed with Outbound in 2025. I'd love to introduce the panelists. I'll have them introduce themselves. And we do have one slight change to the agenda. So I'm going to start with Lucy. I'll let you introduce yourself, who's here as a colleague of Nia's.
Yeah, hi. So I'll be stepping in for Nia today, but I've worked with Nia for many years. So I'm guessing we share some of the same wisdom. So hopefully you're not missing out too much there. But my name's Lucy Obatelli. I'm an account executive over at My Sales Coach. I've been in sales and doing outbound sales for 4 or 5 years, so definitely showing my age there. I have been an SDR for around 3 years and was in sales SDR leadership for around 12 months as well. And I'm now obviously in the world of account executives. So outbound is still very much a part of my everyday. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Really excited for today and to share a bit more with you.
Thanks, Lucy. And Mark, if you want to say a few words about yourself.
Yep. Hey, everyone. I'm Mark Colgan. I've been working in sales and marketing, specifically B2B, for the last 14, 15 years. My not claim to fame, but the experience that resonates with Outbound is I used to run a lead research company for a couple of years, which had 100 people doing lead research and helping companies, our clients, with their campaigns. And then I ran an agency which relied on Outbound as well. So now I help companies with their outbound prospecting and sales process. So I think I can bring a perspective which is slightly different to Lucy's, and with Mark's experience here, hopefully we can cover all different angles when it comes to Outbound next year.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Mark and Lucy, for being here. Quick introduction to myself. So my background, I've got the greyest of hairs. I've been doing this for nearly 18 years now. And yeah, I've worked across non-tech and tech for the last 10 years. I've predominantly worked in high growth tech businesses, both VC and bootstrapped. I've worked across all the revenue spectrum, from literally joining as the first go-to-market hire at 0 revenue, right through to 20 million plus in ARR. I've worked with global teams, small teams, big teams, and so on. The last 7 or 8 years as a chief revenue officer across 3 different businesses. I've taught the go-to-market fundamentals course for Sales Impact Academy during the COVID years, consulted and freelanced with a number of different startup businesses, both in the UK and the US, before founding Revved Up. And Revved Up, by way of a very quick introduction, is a scalable ABM platform. What we do is we take the best practices of account-based marketing, which is deep account and prospect research and understanding, developing a unique point of view on that account, figuring out how to relevantly educate them, and then turning that into great copy and unique campaigns across multiple touch points. So that is what Revved Up does as a company. But without any further ado, I'm going to dive straight into the topics. We're going to try and be as practical and pragmatic as possible, so you guys have real actionable takeaways that you can apply into your business. And we're going to start with the question that we see all too much on LinkedIn, but it's a great link-baity question to start with, which is Outbound dead? Or is it just dead as we know it? Mark, I'll start with you. What do you think to people who say Outbound is dead?
Yeah, if people are saying Outbound is dead, they're trying to sell something else like marketing or cold calling. I don't know. I don't think it's dead, but the current status quo of spray and pray, which has been dying for a number of years, But even the more sophisticated outbound with using AI for personalization, it's becoming more of a struggle. I think there's a few reasons for that. One, the amount of people who are receiving emails, because it's never been easier to actually send emails. And then secondly, deliverability and the challenges that come with that. But I think if you're looking at your outbound campaigns, you really want to be focusing more on quality over quantity. And ideally, you want to prioritize signals or triggers to increase the relevancy of your message. So rather than sending the same message to 2,000 people, are there 20 smaller campaigns that you could send out to 100 people that are segmented by particular use case or the triggers or signals that are available in the industry? So it's really taking a quality approach rather than a quantity.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. I love this cynical approach, and I don't disagree. If someone's calling anything dead, it's because they're selling you an alternative solution. Lucy, what's your take on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I probably might echo a bit of cynicism here in my answer. But to be honest, the people that kind of are doing these LinkedIn posts that Outbound's dead and all of cold calling's dead, to be honest, just the people who aren't very good at it. Like, it's a bit of a harsh reality, but it's not working because you're not good at it. Like, that's ultimately it. And I think in years that have gone by, like the 1 minute it's personalization, 1 minute it's videos on LinkedIn, 1 minute it's cold calling. Like, there's always going to be trends of what peaks and troughs. Obviously, with the changes in deliverability and email, like cold calling's having a real boom right now. Lots of people are dusting off the phone and getting back on it. But I think people are just wise to sort of the automated sequences that we were pumping out when it was COVID times. And I think beyond that, just kind of trying to outbound by saying, oh, I know who your favorite football team is, like, it just doesn't hit anymore, and it just doesn't book meetings. Now it's all about value, and as sort of Mark alluded to, sort of like working on triggers and things like that to really kind of catch your prospects at the best time. But it certainly isn't dead, would be my opinion.
Yeah, very, very much agree. I think one of the people that saying outbound is dead or dying, they're pointing to the culprit being AI. And I do think there's a misconception there, which is there's a big difference between AI and automation. They're two separate things. I think the ability to automate mass email is definitely hurting things. And the misapplication or poor usage of AI doesn't help on top of that. But simply blaming AI for everything going wrong, I think is a misappropriation of what's actually happening there. My real quick take is that, similar to billboards, which is a kind of interesting thing, it's a very old school approach to marketing. Billboards tend to fade into the background, and to many people, billboards feel like an ugly eyesore, and they can be an interruption to the public space. But really good ones do cut through, and they make you stop, and they make you smile, and then you share them and you talk about them. And it's same with outbound, right? Bad outbound either gets ignored, or really bad outbound puts people's nose out of joint. But good outbound still cuts through, right? There are so many examples every single day of good outbound cutting through. So it's definitely not dead, but how you do it cannot be done in a lazy way, right? It cannot be cut and pasted, which I guess leads to the next question. And Lucy, I'll start with you on this. If you were to start from scratch in 2025 with an outbound motion, where would you start? Like, what are the foundations of good outbound?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the foundations of good outbound, it really is sort of about using that multi-channel approach. Like, even though it's difficult to kind of get email deliverability is a challenge, even though people are there's a kind of talk of people being less reluctant to connect with people in their network. Like, these are all pools that everybody should be fishing in. So it is making sure that your outbound strategy does cover all of those bases and does have that multi-touch point, multi-channel approach. And it's all about sort of value, as I kind of said. Like, I think in terms of sort of, there's so many things that our products or our service can offer these days, and quite often previously we just sing about the same thing, like, oh, our product does this, and this would be the thread throughout the email or throughout the cadence. Really in sort of 2025, it's like, keep positioning different parts of your offering to see which one hits the nail, because you never know who you're going to be able to reach out to and actually think, actually, I've just had a conversation about that, and that is a big challenge, that is a big problem. But yeah, that sort of leading with problems, leading with challenges, and making sure that you are using that multi-channel, multi-touch approach, and using AI well is the advice for 2025.
100%. I mean, just to quickly jump in and double down on that, I think where people make mistakes around where to start with outbound is they either start with just metrics, right, which is nothing about who they're trying to prospect to, the value they're trying to add, the challenges they're trying to solve, right? It's just metrics, right? And then often from there, they really think about tooling, right? And tooling is just a mechanism for delivering a valuable message. So if there's one thing like an exec team and whether you're an SDR or an executive thinking about outbound, you've got to start with the customer, right? You've got to. And I know it's cliche, but almost everyone that I speak to misses it, right? What does the customer care about? And what is our unique point of view and reason to connect, right? How do we add value to that interaction? Otherwise, your outbound will fall flat, regardless of tooling, regardless of metrics, regardless of who's in place. But Mark, sorry, I jumped the gun there. Is there anything else you would add to that in terms of the foundations you would be advising teams to look at?
You both covered a lot of the best practices, but I think I would just dive even deeper, Mark, on your point of the customers. I think we're all guilty of putting together our ideal client profiles and personas and then leaving them on the shelf, collecting dust. So I would recommend, if you're going to start a new outbound campaign now, have a look at who your more recent best performing clients have been or customers have been, and reverse engineer who they are. I see a lot of companies who say, yeah, we can work with B2B SaaS companies in the UK and North America. And I'm like, okay, any particular industry, any particular size, any particular revenue, any particular headcount, the list can go on. And I think it just feels a little bit intimidating sometimes having to segment your ICP with lots of sub segments, but that really is the key to making outbound work, because as we've all said, it's all about that timing and relevancy of your message. And you can only get that with the right targeting. And it's such a boring answer because everybody's looking for a silver bullet, the one tool that will help them do all of this. But the reality is it's based in the data that you have and really your gut feeling too. So yeah, that would be a couple of things to add.
I think that's super important. How many entrepreneurs have you guys spoken to where it's all about size, right? It's all about, we need a large TAM because we need to support a VC model. And the victim of that is focus, right? So instead of having a focus niche that you can be best positioned to win, you go after everyone, and therefore you fit no one, and your message fits no one. It's so important, right? Have focus, have a niche that you're going to compete in better than anyone else, and all of your outbound will get easier. Right, with that level of focus. It doesn't mean you're not ambitious. It doesn't mean you can't be a VC-backed business. It's just the place to start is have focus.
Mark, can I just add to that, because it's a really important point that you mentioned. I think people think about outbound as this is the one and only campaign that I'm ever going to run. But really, it's just sprints of outbound campaigns. So you can run campaigns to one sub-segment of an ICP, then to the next. Then you can change your ICP. So for me, for example, I found this last year, I work much better with organizations that have at least 2 sales reps, 2 account executives. Before, I didn't realize that was the case. And my learning was that the founder or the senior person just doesn't have time to execute on the things that I teach and recommend. So therefore, my ICP has changed slightly, or it's evolved, let's say. So now when I'm running campaigns, I know who I should be targeting and why I should be targeting them. So I think a lot of work goes into, especially when you have an organization, you have multiple reps, you have a lot of work goes into putting these playbooks together, updating the tools that you're using with all of the emails and everything. But you really have to be flexible and you really have to be dynamic with how you approach outbound.
100%. I love that sprint-based approach to prospecting. Lucy, was there anything you want to add? Or if not, I can move on to the next.
No, I'm happy to move on. But yeah, that was a great point, Mark.
Yeah, really important. Okay, so we are going to move on to AI, right? We cannot talk about outbound and not cover AI. So I've got 2 key questions here. Will AI replace SDRs? And what is the best use case for AI in outbound? I think they're both interlinked, right? Like, will they replace it? And if not, what's the best use case? So let's start with the bigger question. Do you honestly think AI can and will replace SDRs? Lucy, if I come to you first.
I I can wholeheartedly say that I don't think that will be the case. I think that human personal touch is still what really sparks intrigue and everything else. And as we sort of alluded to before, people are wise to bad use of AI. So I think people still have that level of suspicion around it. So it will never sort of eradicate the SDR world. We'll always need sort of those human SDRs. It's just about SDRs in their role using AI well. And really that kind of links to the second part really of the best way to use it. And that is sort of like finding personalization to add to messaging. I think about my time as an SDR and how long I would spend poring over how to make a link between like jujitsu and sort of conversation intelligence. And I would spend hours trying to craft this email that I think that's going to cut through the noise. And don't get me wrong, I feel like to an extent it paid off, but now you can kind of, with the prompts and everything else you can put into AI, you can make that job so much more scalable, so much more, and you can do so much more with it. So there's some of the best use cases for AI in terms of personalization, but also just in terms of sort of, we've talked about the importance of ICP, like really finding out like information about accounts, like understanding who their competitors are, what challenges they're solving, just so you can really speak their language and be relevant. And it's a massive sort of a bonus add for AI, because a lot of the time it just used to be guesswork, and AI does help with that. So no, I don't think SDRs are going anywhere anytime soon at the cost of AI. And I think there's a couple of great use cases for using AI in the role.
Amazing. Thanks, Lucy. And Mark, obviously you are like also very much on the cutting edge of lots of the technology in Outbound. I'm an avid reader of your newsletter. If anyone's not subscribed to it, they should do. I'll drop a link in after this webinar. Talk to me, what do you think is is the correct role of AI, and will these AI SDRs ultimately go and replace human SDRs?
I don't think so. So I don't think they will ultimately replace SDRs. And I think what we're seeing as well with these AI agents or AI SDRs is that they are automating a process that hasn't been working and isn't working. So when you just, the dream is you put in your ICP, you send off an email and you'll get positive replies. And that's just not the reality, because you're not even able to do it yourself. So I like to call this premature automation, where you try and automate something that isn't actually working. I think really the AI should be leveraged by SDRs to help them save time. That time could be manually adding tasks and notes to the CRM, or it could be with automating the research process. But it does take a lot of prompt engineering to get good at that. You can't just give a real generic question to ChatGPT or one of the other AI tools and expect it to have an excellent answer. And I think for those who are on the call today, looking at how they can use AI for personalization, the one thing I would say is let your reps know that they don't have to include personalization. Always fall back on relevancy, but never force the personalization. Like an email that says, oh, hey, Lucy, you must breathe oxygen. So do I. Do you want a demo of my tool? Is what a lot of that AI personalization comes across like. So I think allowing your reps to not actually use personalization, because it's the relevancy and the timing and how good your message is that really gets the reply, not the faux personalization.
100%. I'm so pleased you mentioned that, because that was going to be my double clicking point on this, which is relevance beats personalization every time. In fact, sometimes bad personalization just runs counter. You better not having it at all. I mean, my take on this is that it's very clear that AI SDRs or AI in general is having an impact on the way people think about scaling their SDR teams. Right? I do not by any stretch believe it will simply replace them and that every SDR is going to become redundant. But yeah, I speak to founders and CROs and VPs of sales all the time, and it is very clear that they are less likely to try and hire SDRs in a linear way to growth as they did in the past, right? Everyone is looking at, okay, how can I use the same headcount but scale the output more efficiently, and how can we insert AI into their workflows to make them more efficient rather than having to hire yet another expensive resource into the team. So I do think that overall SDR teams, relative to what they were maybe 2 or 3 years ago, will look smaller. They'll be smaller, they'll be more agile, which is not a bad thing. But I don't think it will replace them. And one of the things I was thinking ahead of this webinar is I used to have a framework that I teach around outbounding for SDRs, and it would be based on the 5 Ps of prospecting, right? And I talk about prioritization, personalization, positioning, persistence, and being progressive, i.e. testing and doing new things. And as I was thinking about, does that still work in today's world? I think so much of what goes into prioritization can now be largely automated. You still want a human in the loop, but thinking about which accounts to go after and whether they're a good fit, there's a lot you can do with the automation. The personalization we've touched on a lot, and actually it doesn't always work, right? It's relevance over personalization. The ability to position correctly, Lucy, you've mentioned it, AI does a pretty good job if you've got the right prompts to do that for you. Persistence will always be there, but with some automation, there's a lot that can be done outside of the human MP. So my take is that, and I'm just playing around with this, but you've kind of got the 3 Cs of how it will switch, which is SDRs will focus more on creativity, right? Thinking about interesting angles, campaigns, like what's the message that we want to get out here, coordination of all the tools that they have at their disposal in the tech stack, and then really focusing on the human connection that you can't get from AI, right? Whether that's meeting people at events, it's maybe building a social profile and brand building on LinkedIn, it's picking up the phone, right? These are things that AI can't do as well. So it's a bit of a work in progress, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about the SDR role will shift away from what I used to teach about the 5 Ps and into these 3 Cs. But yeah, SDRs won't go away, certainly not for a very, very long time. And I'm glad about that too. Okay, so should the outbound motion be owned by marketing or sales? I'm seeing a big shift here. Mark, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I've flip-flopped either side of this answer over the years, but now I believe it should be marketing. And I think this purely because they have a longer term view, marketing does, that is over sales. And there's a report coming out, I think it's just been teased at the moment, but there's a company called Winter. They're producing the B2B SaaS buyer journey report. And one of the kind of high level numbers that they shared in this report is that buyers self-educate. So 91% of buyers will come to a sales meeting already familiar with the vendor. So it's better to come from a marketing angle, from an educational point of view, than a sales one. But that doesn't align with sales and the numbers and the months and the quarters and the quotas. So I think there really has to be a really solid collaboration. And I think there should be a split between short-term goals, but then also long-term goals as well.
Interesting. Lucy, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go on the other side of the flip-flop and actually say that I think it should be sales. And I really believe that because the salespeople are your frontline sellers. They're the ones that are having conversations with prospects day in, day out. And they're the ones that are ultimately hearing it from the horse's mouth of what are the real challenges and the value that we can add. So I think that's why I kind of am more on the side of sales and marketing. Don't get me wrong, like collaboration between the 2 teams is super important. And that's why I do think having like more of a CRO and sort of those 2 roles umbrellaed in marketing and sales and that collaboration of working together is really important. But I think in terms of where I think sort of the outbound motion should fall, it would be sales, just based on kind of the connection that we do have with prospects and sort of hearing their real life challenges.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really important point. Outbound, regardless of where it lives, fails when you're not incorporating the voice of the customer, right? And you're not taking those like coal-face market insights and putting it into your outbound. And there is definitely a danger that if marketing owns it, I've seen this in the past where a marketing team isn't honestly close enough to the customer. They come up with a message that they fall in love with because it's clever. And then they roll that out and it just does not land. And the sales team are like, what is this? Right? I'm not going to market with this. And there's just this disconnect, right? So I think, Lucy, your point is like extremely valid and important. My take is that particularly with conversational intelligence tools, Gong, Gemini, there's so many out there at the moment. It's very easy now to capture that voice of the customer, again, with reasonable scale, and for marketing to pull that in. Like, there is zero excuse that marketing shouldn't consistently have that voice of the customer. So they can, in my opinion, there's a better chance that they can own the outbound motion and not lose the voice of the customer and the market feedback necessary to craft good messages. My take is that it should probably be owned by marketing rather than sales. And that is what I'm seeing more and more, because there's a greater emphasis around outbound being focused on creativity and these micro sprints that Mark's talked about, and multi-touch, multi-channel, than it is brute force activity, which back in the day, it was, you hire 10, 20 SDRs as grads and you brute force activity based on KPIs, right? And marketing leaders weren't set up to do that, right? That's not their job. And so you would have a different setup to drive that. And I think that way of working is changing. But ultimately, both can work, right? You both called out the key things, which is collaboration, great feedback loops, doing the right thing by the customer. So yeah, my tie-break vote would go to marketing, but we will see. And it's certainly valid in both camps. Okay, amazing. So how would you measure the success of Outbound in 2025? And maybe just to extrapolate on that, are the expectations of founders / CEOs set 2 or 3 years ago, possibly in the heyday of Outbound, still reasonable today? Mark, I know you see a wide range of clients, so I'm going to start with you, but Lucy, keen to get your take on this as well. So yeah, Mark, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, look, we only really hear of the success case studies of a company that grew their ARR by 20 million through Outbound. It's very rare that those companies actually do it, and whether or not that was the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So I think we're constantly seeing the best practices, or people are sharing the best practice, but the reality is that most companies can't emulate that for a number of reasons. So I think the expectations are still slightly unrealistic, but they always have been. So there's no real change there. But in terms of how to measure the success, I think it's really tough for those with larger teams. It's much easier for me with the suggestion that I'm going to share, for you to use if you have a small team. But personally, I believe there is that long-term and short-term targets from an outbound point of view to determine whether it was successful. So what that means for me is, how many conversations with ICP fit prospects did we have? And also how many meetings booked? And I think the key difference there is that, and I like to use this example often, is you can't sell car insurance to somebody who doesn't have a car. So you need to find people who have cars, first of all, before you try and sell car insurance to them. Then the next best thing is, if somebody does have a car, when does their insurance policy end? You're not going to sell somebody a new car insurance policy when they have just renewed their existing one. So does it mean that conversation that you had with somebody to find out that they just renewed their car insurance in October was a bad conversation? No, not necessarily, especially if you can take note of that and make sure that you reach back out to that person in the future. Now, I'm using car insurance as a real silly analogy, but it happens in the buying cycles of our prospects as well, where people are bought in on 12-month contracts. They've just renewed with Zoom Info, or they've just renewed with Gong. The fact that your rep reached out to them and found out that information is golden, and you should be able to prioritize that reach out to the prospect in the future. So do we want to de-incentivize our sales reps for not bothering to collect that information, or do we want to reward that as well? So in summary, short-term goals and long-term goals.
Love it. Thanks, Mark. That example of you can't sell their car insurance to folks about cars is golden. I'll be using that in the future. Thank you. Lucy, what's your take on whether the expectations being set are realistic and how they're changing?
Yeah, I do think this is an interesting question, because I think really what we've found, or what seems to be the case across teams sort of in 2025, is that not every meeting holds the same weight. So even though like you could be booking 20 meetings, if they're not relevant or to your ICP, then it's kind of no point. It's futile sort of booking them. So I think when it comes to sort of like measuring the success of sort of outbound, it really is like, how many meetings are we booking with our ICP? How many are we able to convert? And kind of working on that, as opposed to kind of thinking on the metrics, booking more and more and more. It really is down to more like, how can we make sure that we're booking more meetings with the people that we want to speak to, kind of like Mark's point, the people who have a car when it comes to insurance. But yeah, like, how can we make sure, and also that's reflected in terms of rewarding, like, and making sure that those meetings that do hold a bigger weight are the ones that get rewarded and shouted about and everything else. So yeah, I guess that would be my take on it.
Yeah. So I think I'm definitely seeing a shift, right? Like 8-10 years ago, sort of the heyday of predictable revenue when it came out, you spoke to a VP of sales or a CRO and you said, what's the metric for success with an SDR team? If it was mid-market, it was 20 meetings, right? 20 conversations. If it was enterprise, it was like 8 to 10. And if it was SMB, maybe it was as many as 30. It was dead simple, right? It was just have the meetings. That's the metric of success. And I think we've got a lot more, on the whole, most teams have got more sophisticated. And I'm seeing definitely that focus on quality has overridden quantity. So more and more SDR teams is getting comped on basically further down the funnel pipeline, right? It's like, it's got to be a stage 2 opportunity, or it's got to meet this level of criteria. And some are even pushing more and more into just tying it to revenue, particularly where the sales cycle is fast enough that it's, there's a reasonable feedback loop there. So I definitely think that the time of they're just paid on meetings is starting to disappear. It's not completely gone. And I think your point, Mark, is super, super important. So there's a stat which I love and I do believe, which is that on average in any market, there's at most 3 to 5% of buyers are actually in market, right? To your point, they're getting towards the end of their car insurance renewal cycle, they're actively looking to buy. It's a very, very small percentage. If you only run your outbound on metrics of that short-sighted response rate, you will forever be chasing your tail and you'll always be missing the mark. Like, you've got to think about outbound as another approach to educating your market and making them more problem aware, so that when they come into being ready to buy, you're the first people that they trust to come to. So I really love that point. I think it's super, super important. Amazing. Okay. What are some of the tactical tools and plays that you've seen cutting through in the second half of this year? So like, what are the most recent things that you're aware of that seem to be working? People love a tactical playbook or a tool. Lucy, what's working for you at the moment?
Yeah, and I guess this really is a shameless plug for my sales coach as well, because it is really, as opposed to kind of like blanket approach with our SDRs and with our AEs, kind of thinking, oh, we're doing more cold calling, so let's do a bit of training on that. It really is actually about understanding the individual, understanding what their needs are, understanding where their areas of development are, and basically making almost like a cookbook of success. Like, how can we, if you know that after X amount of numbers you get, or bringing X amount of numbers, you get so many connects, then that is sort of like your minimum requirement of the day. So kind of that development of the individual on an individual basis, opposed to a blanket approach to coaching. But then also really that creating a cookbook of success, so that I guess reps know what's expected of them, reps know what they need to hit their numbers and to make sure they're successful. And it just puts kind of that accountability and ownership on them as well. So they're probably the two things in the second half of this year that have really made the difference in terms of sort of our outbound game and approach.
I love that. A cookbook of success. I wish you could order that on Amazon. Sounds great. It would be a bestseller. Amazing. Mark, what are you seeing?
I didn't plan to say this, but Lucy, you made a really, really great point. I remember working with an organization which had about 15 SDRs, and one of their SDRs was booking a lot of meetings via LinkedIn voice notes. So the VP of sales instantly said, right, everybody leave voice notes on LinkedIn. And no one could book as many meetings as the SDR was doing than the original SDR who was booking all the meetings with voice notes. And, he was scratching his head trying to work out what it was. And I reminded him that everybody's an individual. We have different strengths. We have different weaknesses. That particular SDR had a lovely accent and really enjoyed chatting to people. In fact, you couldn't get her to stop. And that was her personality. And she leaned into it and she made it work for her. So I think, Lucy, that's a really, really valid point, is that the individual level coaching is really important. Whilst we do have the playbooks and maybe the cookbook of success, we have to remember that we have different people going through different stuff as well. Some people are having a tough time, others are having a great time as well. And, their results are going to differ. So just wanted to add that in. In terms of some of the tactics and tools, I do love a tool and technology. So for me, I've seen a huge trend or uptick in people talking about signals and triggers this year. I think the theory has always been there, or the theory has been around for a number of years. Just the technology wasn't it didn't enable us to actually leverage these triggers and signals. So Common Room is an excellent platform that can find these triggers and signals. They track hundreds of different data points. Triggerfy is excellent for social engagement. So people liking, commenting, and now even talking about particular posts. They're trying to call it pre-intent. What they're trying to say is that they're just more likely to be interested in what you have to sell if it matches the thing that you're selling. And then also making sure that you are really thinking through what signals are related to your prospects for when they need your solution. Again, that car insurance analogy. In addition to that, I think next year we're going to see a lot more emphasis on LinkedIn, but we're all going to get hammered on LinkedIn for our inboxes. So I think empowering our reps to have more confidence to post on LinkedIn, and at least have a LinkedIn profile which is optimized. The shop window is all there, but then give them the freedom and support to create content. As Lucy mentioned before, they are on the front lines. They are hearing the challenges, the problems. I would think about how can I incentivize my team to share those challenges, share those problems amongst each other, which can then very easily be kind of repurposed slightly for content. Of course, not sharing anything confidentially.
Fantastic. I like the idea of pre-intent. And my only challenge, and again, this is definitely not scripted, so apologies for putting you on the spot, Mark, but one of my challenges with a lot of the intent signals is because they're now scalably accessible to people, let's say through Common Room. I remember a test, we subscribed to Boho, so we could see everyone who's fundraising announcement, even if it wasn't public, and we could reach out to them just after their fundraise. Great trigger, right? It's been a playbook that's been around for a very long time. If everyone's got access to the same signal at the same time, then everyone's going to pile in at the same time, right? With essentially the same message. That's my challenge with it. Like, how do you? I think the really interesting space to play is that pre-intent. Like, if it's that solidly obvious to everyone, it's less of an advantage. But if you can get there first, that's really interesting.
Well, I do take confidence, Mark, in the fact that the majority of people's outreach is bad. So that's one kind of plus. If you know how to write message that cuts through the noise, that is really written in that voice of the customer, and it targets a particular pain point. That funding one as well is a great example, because the point to reach out to somebody isn't when they've raised a round of funding. It's either beforehand, if you knew that they were raising a round of funding, or maybe 6 to 12 months after. Once the dust has settled, once they've now come to the realization of those aggressive targets they have to hit that they're not hitting, now they're in a lot more pain than when they had 8 million in Series A in the bank. The same with some of the other triggers as well. And I think it's how you initiate the conversation. I never really mention at all the reason I'm reaching out. I don't say, oh, hey, I saw you started a new job, or congrats on the round of funding, yada, yada, yada. It's more about there's an implied understanding that I'm reaching out at the right time with a relevant message. So that's another bit of advice, is like, you don't have to reference the trigger or signal that you've used. You just go straight in for the relevancy and the pain point.
Yeah, Perfect. Thank you for sharing that, because I see that misused all the time. So that's a really important point for people to take away. Just from my side, a couple of things that people might want to look at. So I think there's two parts to this. So the first is, ironically, most people still don't get the fundamentals right.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this, so not to labor it too much, but like, get your list quality up to par. Do the research, whether it's manually or through an AI tool, and then really focus on the messaging, make it unique, interesting, very clear, and so on. It's amazing how far you'll get if you get the fundamentals right. And then the second piece is kind of outside of SDRs per se, but just thinking about outbound in general and building pipeline. I'm seeing kind of three trends or things that people have doubled down on in the second half of the year. The first is B2B influencers. Right, my feed is just full of people who are recommending other tools, typically with some kind of affiliate link to that. The second, which I'm a big believer in, and we're running this ourselves, is micro events. So, having human touch points that sit outside of your digital cadence, inviting people to a breakfast or a dinner, and adding some value in that way. So you're just standing out. I think they're more and more popular. And then the third is just the exec brand building side of things, right? So I'm seeing more and more CEOs be the public face, and again, taking quite a public point of view on things in order to build awareness of what they stand for as a business. And again, that's something that we're leaning into. So those are just three things that I'm seeing accelerate in the second half of this year that seem to be working. Okay, we have got 15 minutes, so I'm going to flip over to our quick fire round. I'm not going to participate in this. I'm going to throw it over to you guys, so I don't eat up too much more time. And then we should hopefully have a bit of time for the audience questions as well. Are you ready? We're going to go quick, yes. 30-second answers here. Good. All right. Mark, I'll start with you on the first one, and then we'll alternate it from there. So what business do you most admire for their outbound game?
So fortunately, I don't get a lot of cold outbound these days. Maybe I've got a really undesirable job title on intentionally. But in the past, I do. One that sticks out to me is Deal. They messaged me when I was hiring. I had 3 open roles, and their message was, as you hire, the admin and the paperwork takes a lot more of your time. I see you don't have a HR person, so are you managing all this? Do you think you should be spending your time with all this admin? And I was like, no, I don't. And yes, I will take a call. So perfect timing. And just to give a different example, I create some videos on YouTube. I'm not really trying to go viral with it, but I know I could be doing better from an SEO point of view on YouTube. And I've received a couple of emails recently that didn't say my name. They merge tagged the whole YouTube channel name. So there's so many things wrong with it, but they were like, we think we can help you get better reach and optimize your videos because you're spending time on it. And we can help you increase the visibility. The message wasn't perfect, but it's a problem, and it's something that I've been thinking about, and I have just started thinking about, okay, I'm aware of the problem, now I need to look for a solution. So I'm not saying that's an excuse for bad messaging, but it just shows the importance of timing.
Love it. Thanks, Mark. Lucy, what's your example?
Yeah, so my example is actually a company called Swap. Now, obviously, you've just mentioned there, Mark, about the rise of LinkedIn influencers in the second half of this year. And if you are on LinkedIn and you're in the SaaS world, you cannot move for this company called Swap. They are all creating videos and content, which they are putting out weekly, daily, some of them, and you can't miss it. Like, I've learned more about e-commerce, which I have little to no interest in apart from an online shopping addiction over the last few weeks, and it's just incredible. So I can't speak to their results and how they're prospecting, but from an education piece and leading with value, they seem to be a team that are doing really well on LinkedIn at the moment. And I can only imagine that they're getting a lot of success from it, given sort of their funding rounds and everything else. So yeah, a big shout out to them.
I think, sorry, Mark, to jump in. Yeah. Lucy, you've just shared that with hundreds of people that are listening to this now. Like, how are they ever going to attribute that? But I wrote down their name. I'm going to go and check them out, and I'm now going to become aware of them. So it just goes to show, like, you can't always control the direct results of an outbound campaign.
Yeah. This is for another webinar, but the over rotation onto attribution for everything kills so much like good stuff. I think, but yeah, discussion for another day. Okay, Lucy, staying with you, should everyone on the go-to-market team be responsible for creating pipeline?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the alignment of marketing and sales is ultimately key to creating pipeline, whether that be from sort of like a content creation side of things, more in marketing, or whether that's kind of like SDRs to sales leaders, boots on the ground, making cold calls. I think really it is a joint responsibility that everybody should be working towards. And I think having a joint goal is what acts as a motivator to collaborate more and work together and, yeah, really make a success of it and hopefully hit the goal. So, yeah, definitely think everybody should be doing it.
Awesome. Mark, what's your take?
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. I think it's all about attention and eyeballs. 91% of buyers are doing all their research before reaching out. So the more people you have creating content that's useful and valuable, the better and the net positive it will be for your organization.
Awesome. And then Mark, staying with you, if AI isn't part of your strategy in 25, will you get left behind?
Yeah, I believe so. It does need to be part. I don't think it should replace any one function 100%. And I don't think you'll be fired or out of work, but I think you'll be turning up to a gunfight holding a banana if you're not leveraging AI, which can help you in one way or the other.
Awesome. And Lucy?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I do think, as sort of Mark's alluded to, it doesn't need to be your whole rip out and replace and just bring in AI. That isn't going to solve your problems. But if AI isn't a part of your strategy, it just means that you are going to be left behind, unfortunately. So, yeah, definitely think it has to be part of the plan for 2025.
Awesome. And I said I wouldn't contribute, but I can't help it because your analogy there is very apt. But my take is that if you outsource everything to AI, right, and you hope it is a silver bullet that will solve everything. You mentioned having a banana in a gunfight. I do think people will take that gun and shoot themselves in the foot, right? If it's used badly and they try and use everything, so it's got to be used correctly and wisely. But I do agree with you. Like, if you don't have AI as part of your strategy, you simply will be falling behind, right? It is just as simple as that. Okay, will email be more or less important as a channel next year? Lucy, I think we're on you to start with.
Yeah, I think it will be slightly less important, but I think it's always going to have a place. And that's the way that I think a lot of companies approach to emailing is these days. It's like, I still want my team to be emailing, but I understand it's not going to be my main source of generating meetings. So there's still value to be had in it. And I think with the rise of LinkedIn and LinkedIn influencers and messaging videos, everything else, it's always going to be part of the pizza, but it's never going to be like the main slice. So I think it will sort of start to decline with the deliverability and Gmail and Outlook's new rules, etc. But that's kind of a trend we've seen this year and probably will follow in 2025.
Great stuff. Mark?
Trying to think of another food analogy, but I think it will be slightly less important just because of the way it's being abused. But in my opinion, it's never really been about the channel. It's never been about the individual channel. It's about getting the reply, and you get the reply by sending the right message to the right person at the right time, regardless of the channel. And that's always been my take on it.
Totally agree. Amazing. Last rapid fire question. Can and should every sales rep be social selling? Mark, this one's to you to start.
Yeah, I do. I believe they should be, but I also understand it's super hard when you're new to a role, new to an industry. Maybe it's your first office job. We see that a lot with sales development reps too. But really, what you need to do is act as a sponge. Every conversation you have with a prospect is an opportunity for content, of course, keeping it confidential. And every learning shared by your team is also an opportunity for content. I grew up in the boiler room. I learned from what cold call openers were working, by sitting next to somebody it was working for them, and then I would try it. As we're all remote, it's challenging, but as leaders, there are things that you could do to encourage that sharing of information that gets fed back to everybody, so that a rising tide raises all boats.
Awesome. Lucy?
Yeah, I absolutely believe every sales rep should be social selling. And I think it's obviously come up in this call a lot of times about LinkedIn influencers and everything else. And I think it really is sharing the message of, you don't have to be a LinkedIn influencer. You don't have to be posting funny memes and content or whatever, you can just use the channel and use the messaging functionality, because I think that can be the confusion sometimes. It's like, oh, I have to post content, I have to message people, I have to build relationships, and it's like, you don't have to do all of that, but posting content that's relevant to the people you want to speak to, and sparking conversations, sharing things that you're interested in, like, they're so valuable and so underplayed that people don't do them. And I think the more to the point is, it just has to be one of those pools that you use, just so you do catch that right person. Somebody might not pick up their phone, somebody might not look at their emails. So if you're not using LinkedIn where they're present and where they're used, then you're missing out on opportunities. So definitely think every sales rep should be using it, but just measure it in terms of, where are my strengths? If your strength's cold calling, do more of that. If your strength's LinkedIn, do more of that.
Super valuable advice. Really strongly agree with that. Okay, we've got a few minutes to go through some of the pre-submitted questions. Given there's a fair few folks still on this call live, if anyone that's asked a question or has a follow-up question to the discussion so far wants to jump in and ask it, then I'm going to give you guys a privilege for turning up live. Otherwise, I'll start picking them off the pre-submitted list. So yeah, does anyone want to jump on camera and ask a question?
I have one question, maybe, if that's okay, from maybe 2024, more towards like maybe from the LinkedIn side of things. What has been either a post or an article or a video that you've seen from like other companies that has either caught your eye or resonated to say, wow, that was actually great content that I wish I could have thought about doing that? That makes sense.
Does. I mean, I can jump in with a couple of examples that I've seen that I really like. So there's two that I follow. So there's a guy called Anthony Pieri and another one called Pierre Durable. I'm probably mispronouncing his name horribly. I'll drop links in to their LinkedIn profiles so you can check them out. And what I really like about them is they are extremely value-led, right? They always add interesting insights, useful frameworks, practical advice. They usually have a pretty hot take as well. Like, they have a strong point of view, which is interesting. And they're so consistent, right? The formatting of their posts are consistent, the amount they post. So I think they're two like standout profiles to me who are doing a great job of building personal brands and profiles on LinkedIn.
One brand that came to mind is Win AI, and they're all about not excuse me, not manually inputting data into your CRM. So when they launched, I think it was about a year ago, they sent keyboards out to a bunch of micro influencers and asked them to smash them or break them, and then film that and then share that on LinkedIn. I know that generated a lot of buzz, but I think there's a fine line between like this engineered virality versus just organic virality as well. So I think it's like personalization. When you try too hard, it comes across as fake. And I think it can be the same with micro influencers doing, you know, like a co-collaborating campaign as well.
Yeah, I think to add to that, just a couple of well, an individual and I guess a company. In terms of individuals, I would say somebody like Benjamin Dennehy, who does his live cold calling. I think because there's so many people on LinkedIn that tell you this is the way to cold call, this is the way to do this. Like, to hear him actually use all of his advice, and it's practical advice that he puts into use on his conversations, then it just adds that level of credibility to what he's doing. So I think he does a really good job of posting videos on LinkedIn on that. And then in terms of companies, I was very fortunate earlier in the year to go to Austin, and we had a conversation with a talk really with their at SaaSup with their head of marketing, and he was saying about the power of video. They do TikTok videos, they do videos on LinkedIn, I think even on Instagram as well. And it is just really digestible, enjoyable content, which is funny. It's probably not pushing home the message of like what ClickUp do and everything else, but it is just the brand awareness is really, really great. So yeah, there's some that spring to mind.
Awesome. I could spend the next 2 or 3 minutes talking about some others as well, but I'm going to drop links for the follow-on post. All right, 2 minutes to go, and then we'll give everyone 60 seconds to get to their next virtual meeting before they're late. Which one to pick? Is there anyone who wants to jump on and ask another question? Thanks so much, Kenny, for yours. Okay, I'm going to ask one last one then to you both. Which one haven't we answered? We've answered a lot of these already in the general conversation. What are the most important skills to learn for outbound selling in 2025? What would you say? It's quite a big one. What's your hot take? What are the most important skills for outbound selling in 25? Whoever wants to jump in first.
I think it's a classic, isn't it? But resilience will get you very far. I love how we all laugh because we just know that that's such a. But yeah, like resilience is going to be the thing. You're going to try and fail, and you will also try and succeed. And I remember always getting that message of like, every no is one step closer to a yes, and it used to be the most frustrating piece of advice, but that will really go a long way in 2025, particularly when there's new AI tools, when there's more people doing what we're doing, there's more sort of opportunity, really. Like, you're just going to have to get a lot of no's to get to that yes. But I think with that as well is just like courage to be bold and be different in your outreach. Like, that's what cuts through the noise. You can't be generic anymore. You can't send generic follow-ups. They just don't work. You do have to kind of have that sort of bullishness and courage to try new things and to stick at it to be successful. They would be my two, I would say.
Lucy, I was going to say resilience, and the one tip that I want to give before we end, with yourself and then your team, do this exercise of going to the next time you go to a coffee shop, a restaurant, H&M, wherever, go and ask for a discount, and just sit with the uncomfortableness of asking, preparing for it, and then asking, and then 5 seconds, 30 seconds later, just reflect back and go, nothing changed. The world didn't end. I actually don't feel that embarrassed. So I'd say for any leaders on the call, try that yourself and then get your team to do it as well. And just little bits at a time will help you build your resilience.
Absolutely love it. Okay, thanks so much, Lucy. Mark, you've been amazing as expected. Really appreciate it. And as I said, we will do a second session offline to answer the rest of these questions. Everyone else who's given your morning or afternoon to spend an hour with us, thanks so much. Best of luck with your outbounding in 2025, and do reach out if you want to speak further about it.
Cheers all. Take care.
Yes, bye.
Have a good one. Bye bye.